All right. Welcome back to the Addictively Speaking podcast. My name is James. I'll be your host for today. And today we're going to be talking about triggers because I've had a lot of stuff going on in the last couple weeks that have made me think about what I wanted to talk about. I was thinking I was going to go into recovery and I've just decided that yeah, something has just kind of triggered me to talk about triggers. I because actually the 17th of November was the anniversary of my dad's passing. So these things kind of like jumpstart stuff in your mind, and they think, oh, I'm gonna talk about triggers because in recovery, it's huge. I mean, you go into recovery, and around you are all these outside factors that play into your recovery period. They play into how you recover and what that looks like and how you deal with these triggers that will come up all the time, all over the place. There's going to be situations, there's going to be people, all kind of stuff that can just, trigger you. And it's difficult to navigate, because you don't ever know how you're going to deal with it. And so it's like one of those things, that you have to kind of learn as you go. I know in the beginning for me, I was more focused on staying sober no matter the cost. So that kind of like really propelled me forward in recovery was just staying sober at all costs because I knew the repercussions of what would happen if I drank, what would happen because my addictive mind, goes to very, very dark places. And I still, it's funny because I was thinking about recording this podcast for a couple days and I kind of get really like keyed up and anxious about it because I want to get the information out. But it's like my addictive mind starts working, and my wife has to like sit me down and be like, "Listen, um, you need to kind of like rein it back because like I dive straight in, and I'm like 100 miles an hour. So like my lack of being able to moderate just seeps its way into everything in my life, and I find it difficult every now and again because like I have to be brought back to reality because I just kind of like focus in and then I kind of go like a million miles an hour with stuff. And I'm like thinking about like, well, content and this and that. And it kind of like just consumes everything. And I have to remember that like I have a family, I have a job, I have other things that I have, pulling me in different directions. So I have to kind of learn how to cope with all of it. But yeah, I really wanted to get this episode out because triggers are huge. I mean, they pop up everywhere in our lives. There's people that are triggers. There's situations that are triggers. There's all kind of stuff. I realized I'm 10 years sober, and I was at work, and I was behind the bar helping out, which right is kind of crazy. Recovering alcoholic behind the bar, finding himself in these situations. But I've learned to like try to like deal with that and cope with it the best I can. But I was making a drink, and I just was like, the smell just kind of like tickled something in my brain, and my brain was like, "Ooh, yeah, we like that, don't we?" Oh, I remember liking that a lot. It's crazy because you kind of, I don't know, when you're not around it as much and you kind of like pull yourself away from it, you know, it's funny how a smell can just trigger something in your mind to just think like, "Yeah, yeah, that was great." And it's really funny because you had to kind of like I had to pull myself back, and I was like, "Oh shit, I need to get away from the bar for a minute because like that's very that's dangerous, Not to kind of like step back because yeah, these triggers, they activate stuff in your brain that you've kind of like figured out how to block off or how to navigate better through your recovery. But there are triggers that are just really difficult. I used to find it easy to go out to like bars and stuff like that and be around people that were drinking. And as I got further into my recovery, I found it so painfully difficult. Like I hate being around really drunk people. It causes me massive amounts of anxiety. It just really gets me like worked up. Like I have to try to avoid the situation at all costs because I can do it for a little bit, but I just always feel like there's going to be a moment where something happens or somebody says something or like, you know, somebody tries to start a fight or like whatever, like things that like drag me back to those places. Like, especially like fighting because that's all I did was like, you know, get real real drunk and real violent. So I just don't want to be in the situation where like somebody gets drunk and gets mouthy, and I feel like I'm pushed into a position where I have to defend myself, or I have to feel like, you know, I might have to punch this guy in the mouth because, I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be that guy. But on the other hand, like I don't have a problem punching somebody in the mouth if they're getting stupid. Like I don't, and that's the scary thing is because I don't. But I have to think about so many other things that like encompass that. Like when I was drinking, I didn't care. I had no care. I had no regard. My inhibitions got zero. I had zero fucks. Like it didn't matter. I would punch you in the face if you looked at me funny. If you were acting like you were gonna start a fight, I would beat the shit out of you. Now, now don't get me wrong. Like I've had my fair share of bumps and bruises, and I had my nose broke. Well, I think like three months going. Like every month, I was getting punched in the face and having my nose broke. So I look back at those pictures, and it kind of helps me reflect and pull myself back and say, look at you come a really long way. Like you really have. You've pulled yourself out of the shit, built yourself a life, so there's no reason that you should throw this away because it's not worth it. So you have to kind of keep those in your mind, especially with these triggers, because like there's events that come up, and a lot of mine are like, there's for me it's like bachelor parties. I had to do that in my early recovery. Was I had a couple bachelor parties that I had to attend, and obviously stay away. And there's things that always come up where you're around a group of people who are drinking, who might not know, and when people get drunk, they get a little bit more uh, free, and they get, their inhibitions get lowered. So they're a little bit more pressuring and stuff. Luckily for me, my friends weren't like that. They kind of just let me be. And that was my decision to stay sober. And they kind of respected that. But I do get in situations now. Actually, it's like last night I went out with some friends and we were watching the NFL games up in London. And, sometimes people are like, "Oh yeah, have a drink, mate. Come on, yeah, just have one. What's the big deal? Da da da. Stop being a pussy." And I know they're joking, but again, it plays on your mind because there's all these triggers, and you're in a situation where like before you would have been that guy. You would have been drinking and getting pissed and going crazy, and now you're not. So you have to kind of like sit back and kind of like pull yourself back from the situation and like regroup in your mind. So like I have to kind of like regroup and be like, all right, yeah, called you pussy. So what? Let it go. Not a big deal. Like it's just banter. It's just fun. Like just kind of like don't think too much into it. Um, but yeah, it's just like the situations with triggers kind of crop up sporadically through your addiction. And some people, it's very hard to avoid the triggers, and it's really hard to cope with them, and they cope with them by relapsing. They fall straight back in because triggers are difficult because you have to learn how to cope with all these things that are very difficult to deal with. Like mine is a lot of loss. Losing my friend Ron is a huge trigger, and it triggered me tons of times, subconsciously. Like you don't even realize it's the thing it's propelling you to do these things. It's the thing that's driving you to do these things. Like my suicide attempt in 2004, I think it was. I can't. They all blur together. It was 2004, I think, and that was one of the huge triggers. I ended up in the psych ward over the 3 days leading up to his passing, and it happened every year for like 6 years, where I right around August 14th, like 2 days before, I would start just spiraling. I would start making horrible decisions. I would go to extreme levels of belligerence because, yeah, because I somewhere subconsciously I knew it was coming, and I would just go I would just go off the deep end and get real self-destructive. So, getting recovery, I have to learn how to, process that information and change the way I think about it. Because even now, like, when it comes towards that time of year, my mind knows, it knows it's coming, so I prepare. And now I kind of look for, I think that they're like little signs that he gives me, like that he's still here watching me, and that he's, you know, supporting me and loving me. And, and that he's not gone, that he'll always be with me. I mean, I always wear like my crew stuff is always visible. It's something that we created that it's like my coping thing. Like it helps me deal with it. It's like this thing that we created. Well, I'll pass it to my kids and they'll pass it to their kids. It's like a thing that's gonna live forever. So in essence, like he's not gone. So that helps me deal with it, right? Because it gives me something positive out of such a horrible situation, and I don't kind of drift into that terrible place. Because I've had a couple instances where, it was around the time of his passing, and these things would crop up. But now I look at him more of like a friendly hello from the other side. I put on the telly the one time in America, and it was on the day he passed away, and it was a song we used to listen to all the time, um, in his mom's house in his room, and it came on, and what are the chances that it comes on the day he passed away? Like, what are the chances? You don't hear this. So it's like a '90s song. Like, why would that come on? So I was like, I just thought, oh, that's really nice, you know. But in other sense, that would have been like a huge trigger, wouldn't it? I'd have been like, oh shit, and I think about it. And then like this past year, one of the songs that we played at his viewing when I was at work at like 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock in the morning, it came on the Alexa and started playing really loud. And I was just like, oh, all right. Hey, Ron, how are you? Kind of brings me it brings me more joy now to know that, like, maybe he's just saying hi. One before, it would have took me to a really dark place and maybe triggered me to do something, chaotic or reckless. So it's good to find these coping skills, because we have to have them. Like as addicts in recovery, like you have to have like these coping skills. I do a lot of running and going to the gym because it's an escape. It's what I use to quiet everything in my head and like mitigate the anxiety and mitigate the depression, um, because it gives me the euphoric feeling. It gives you all those good endorphins that kind of course through your body. So in your recovery, you have to look for these things, and you have to find like what are the things that are going to help you cope best. And nobody can tell you what that is. You kind of have to figure that out on your own and figure it out, so you don't, relapse, so you don't fall back into it, because the triggers are all around you. They'll always be around you. They'll be, tugging on your shoulder. That little, devil on your shoulder is always going to be whispering in your ear, going, "Yeah, man, do that. That'd be a great idea." It's always going to be there. It's going to be a nagging thing, because yeah, in addiction, you're even after you're in recovery, like it's a battle every day. It's a battle all the time. I don't think people give you enough credit of like what's going on in your head and how you're actually dealing with it, because the old you would have done terrible, terrible things, you know, with all the stuff that's going on, all the pressure, the work, all everything, like all the work pressures, all the life pressures, all the family pressures, that all mounts up. And for somebody who used substances as a crutch, you definitely find it a lot harder to deal with, because you use something else to escape. You use something else to numb. You use something else to lower your inhibitions and just deal with shit. And now you have to deal with shit in real time, in real life, and that's a lot more difficult because you're having to process it all. And it's a lot harder because before, if shit was bad and I felt like everything was going wrong, I would just drink, and it wouldn't solve anything, but it would take it away for a while. I'd be so inebriated that, 2 or 3 days would pass and it'd still be shitty, but I'd just start drinking again. Like, I would just, deal with it by being drunk or being belligerent or making it worse for myself. In essence, I would just continue to dig the ditch that I was in. I would just be like, fuck it. Let's dig the hole. Let's see how deep we can get this bitch. And now, being in recovery, like I have to process the information. I have to digest it. I have to figure out what I'm going to do to cope with it. The stress, the anxiety, all of it. I have to figure out what that is, because it's not easy. And I think people don't understand that people in recovery, long-term recovery, and even short-term recovery, is that you're learning to deal with all of this stuff that you didn't deal with before because you were drunk or high or whatever. You didn't deal with it at all. You just, you know, did drugs and did alcohol just to push it all away. And now you're dealing with it all in real time. So it's kind of a bit overwhelming. And I think the further I've gotten along in recovery, I've learned to, like, when my triggers crop up and my things like that, I can deal with them a lot better now. Or I just kind of know when it's time to leave a situation or to move away from a situation because it's giving me too much mental stimulant. It's giving me too much aggro. I can't process it properly, or I'm so anxious that I can't enjoy myself, and that's no fun. So I just kind of have to say, all right, I'm gonna head out. I can't deal with all this drunk people, or I can't deal with what's happening at the time. And I think that's the huge step in the right direction for me, is that I know my limits. I know my boundaries. Uh, they're clear. There's no gray area. I know what I can handle. I know what I can't handle, and I know what I have to remove myself from. And that's like a huge thing, because now I can eliminate tons of stuff, um, by leaving a situation and not, letting it become something that really, really pushes my button or really, really triggers me. You know. So I think encompassing this episode is like, with triggers, they're gonna come up, especially in your recovery, early recovery, late recovery. You have to have a support system as well. Like, you have to have friends and families who are there pushing you in the right direction and supporting you, because it's so much easier to relapse and fall back into it than it is to push forward, because that's the hard part, is pushing forward and being like, shit, how do I deal with this? How do I grow from this? How do I move on from this? Because triggers, you know, they're all the time. They're every day. They're all over the place. Stress. It's just all kind of stuff, like life stuff. Pushes your buttons. It pushes you to the limit, and you have to be strong enough in your recovery to deal with it and process it. And if you can't, you have to be strong enough to reach out for help, and go to that extra meeting or talk to your sponsor. I wasn't in the 12 step, but I know that that's a huge outlet for people, that it's a huge thing that people can utilize, that before they fall down, before they relapse. And just because you relapse doesn't mean you can't start over and start again and build your recovery and just learn from that mistake and learn what that trigger was. Learn what that thing was that sent you over the edge. And then once you've learned what that is, figure out how you can deal with that. Figure out how you can manage that, on a daily basis. Figure out how you can manage it, because managing it and mitigating it are huge. They're huge tools in this recovery tool bag, because you have to be able to manage it. You have to be able to see, oh, shit, I know this is coming up. I know this is happening. I know this is what it's going to make me feel like. How do I defend against that? It's like a football game, offense and defense. Like, the offense could be attacking you, and you need to, what's your defensive plan? How are you going to, what are the X's and O's? How are you going to defend against that? How are you going to set yourself up for success in coping with life, coping with triggers, coping with stress, coping with anxiety, and just, figure out what that plan is and then do that. I struggle. I'm up and down. Like my anxiety sometimes is high. Sometimes I'm depressed. I go in like the peaks and valleys of life, and um, things are tough. So you have to be able to, you know, tighten things up and figure out these skills to help you cope and deal. I know I've developed them over 10 and a half years. So, I have a lot of things that I can utilize, especially with my running and my gym stuff and like working out and just kind of like that helps me generate positivity, and it helps all the endorphins that kind of get released kind of help me. It eliminates a lot of that anxiety and that stress and that aggro, and that helps me kind of like reset, and then I can figure out, oh, this is what it was. This is how I'm dealing with it. This is how I'm going to move forward. And also, having my wife as a huge support system, and my family and my friends always there to help push me in the right direction, or just at least listen to the shit that I'm going through, so that I can at least have an outlet to let it all go. I talk to my brother a lot, and kind of like I know I feel bad sometimes because when things get really hard, my mom would be my go-to, but since my mom has passed away, my brother's kind of inherited all my baggage where I just kind of like dump it on him. And sometimes I feel like he just doesn't know what to do with it, and that's fine. But sometimes it's better for me to just release it and then kind of like deal with it all and process it all. And kind of sometimes hearing it come out makes me feel a lot better in that situation. So in recovery, the main thing to deal with triggers is finding out how to deal with them. So you find out what they are, create the plan on how you're going to deal with them, how you're going to mitigate them, and then use that through your recovery to help you continue growing and continue being the best version of you possible. Because in the end, that's what you want to be. Like, I want to be the best version of me going forward every day for the rest of my life, for the rest of my recovery, because every day I'm going to be triggered. I'm going to have issues. I'm going to have stress. I'm going to have all this stuff. But I have to deal with it now in real time, and I have to get good at, you know, doing that. So my recovery, I don't have a slip. I don't have a trip. I stay on the path and I stay going forward. And with my love and support from my family and friends, that's it. That's where I'm going to go. So this is going to be the episode on triggers. I hope you guys enjoyed it. What I'd love you to do is to go to Spotify, listen, like, share, subscribe, whatever you can do to help push this podcast forward. Share with your friends, everything. Go to the socials, go to Instagram. I'm on there. It's Addictively Speaking, JK. Find me, request me, share, whatever. Thank you, and have a great day.